The train hissed and groaned beneath a sky the color of pewter, dull and unfeeling. It had come through the Sangre de Cristos slicked with snow melt, pulling in slow to the station at Las Salinas. No more than a post, a flag, and a wind-rattled sign bolted to a crooked pine beam. The land rolled out flat beyond it, mud and tumbleweed, raw-boned and empty. Esther Bell stepped off the train alone. She wore a blue coat too thin for March, frayed gloves and boots freshly polished but cracked at the heel. In her gloved hand was a small brown valise marked with initials not her own. She held her chin high, though the wind sliced sharp against her throat, and the faces staring from the platform wore expressions of plain curiosity or quiet ridicule. She was 46, though most would not guess it straight. Her spine held an uprightness born not of vanity but endurance. Her mouth was thin, unsmiling, the kind of woman who carried silence like others wore jewelry. But inside her chest, beneath the tight-buttoned bodice, was a heart beating fast, not from fear but from something crueler expectation. She scanned the platform. No man stepped forward. No hand rose in greeting. The letter she'd folded in her pocket, creased with rereading, had been clear. I will meet you at the Las Salinas Depot, noon train, March the 8th. Yours in expectation, Charles L. Hayward. That was the promise, the dream, the trade. A bride for a man of the West. A second life paid in the coin of survival. But noon passed. One by one, passengers were met, wagons drawn, greetings shouted, hands shaken. Until only she remained, standing beside her valise and a single trunk, every possession she owned or dared bring west. And then even the depot clerk stepped back inside, the door swinging shut behind him with a final click. Esther did not cry. She sat on her trunk, composed, a woman too old for breakdown and too dignified for begging. She waited. Half an hour later, a man approached the platform with a shuffle in his gait. He was lean, sun-darkened, with a patchy beard and eyes the color of dusty moss. He wore a coat missing a button and a hat that looked older than he was. In his hand was a small parcel, twine-wrapped, likely salt pork or biscuits, and he paused when he saw her. "You waiting on someone, ma'am?" he asked. Esther turned her face to him. "I was." He scratched his jaw. "Don't mean to pry, just this train don't bring many strangers." She nodded toward the horizon. "He did not come." "Ah," he sat beside her without invitation, not out of boldness but weariness, the kind of tired that made formality irrelevant. Was he a man from here? "He wrote from Las Salinas. Said he kept sheep east of the mesa." The man gave a short breath through his nose. "Ain't but one sheepman east of the mesa, name of Hayward. If that's the one, I'd say you're better off left." Esther's lips thinned. "He sent for me." Hayward, a drunk and a liar. I seen him beat a dog half to death because it barked too long, kicked his last hand out in a snowstorm for not calling him sir. I'd say again, you're better off. Esther said nothing. She looked at the man as if weighing him. He didn't flinch. "Name, Tom Garvey, got a place west of here, dry and stubborn, mostly rock, not much water, 3 head of cattle, 2 mules, and a barn that leaks like sin. But I don't lie, and I don't raise my hand to women or dogs." She watched him carefully. "You're not in need of a wife." "No," he said plainly, "but you look like a woman who didn't come this far to turn around." The air stilled between them. "I could make a stew," she said at last. "I know how to keep hens and mend canvas. I don't talk much." Tom nodded. "And I don't expect sweetness or children. I'm 49. What I need's someone who'll outlast the wind." Esther stood, straightened her skirt, and picked up her valise. "Then we'll marry before supper." Tom tipped his hat. "There's a preacher in town. Let's walk." They left the station together. Neither looked back. That evening she signed her name in the church ledger beneath Tom's. There was no ceremony, no dress, no kiss. Just a shake of hands, a murmured blessing, and two tired souls who understood that survival sometimes comes dressed as failure, and that mercy can look like a poor man with calloused hands. They rode home in silence beneath a dusk full of crows. And so began the first day of a marriage that was not meant to be love, but would become something harder, deeper, and more dangerous than either could have guessed. The wagon wheels groaned over frost-hardened ruts as they made their way west. The road wasn't a road at all, just a track pressed into the dirt by hooves and hope. Tom let the reins rest easy in his lap while the mules trudged forward, heads down, breath steaming. Esther sat beside him, gloved hands folded in her lap, spine straight despite the jostle of the wagon bed. Her trunk rode in the back, tied down with a frayed rope. She hadn't asked what waited for her. He hadn't offered. It was nearly dark when they reached the homestead. The house stood like a held breath against the flat horizon, 2 rooms, 1 chimney, walls weathered gray and stripped by wind. A single lantern burned in the window, weak against the dusk. A hen coop sagged beside it, half the slats broken. Behind the house, the barn hunched like a drunk in prayer, its roof patched with tarred canvas and hope. "This is it," Tom said. Esther climbed down, the chill biting through her soles. "Where do I sleep?" He didn't hesitate. Inside, in the front room, got a cot there. Mine's in back, stoves in the middle, we'll take turns heating it. She nodded, stepped past him, and opened the door without waiting. Inside smelled of cold iron, tobacco, and dust. A single rug lay curled at one edge. The cot was narrow but clean. There was no mirror, no lace, no suggestion that a woman had ever lived here. Esther set her valise on the cot, removed her coat, and stood a moment in her wool dress, staring at the walls. Tom brought in her trunk, set it down without word, and moved to the stove. Wood stacked out back, water pumps half frozen. "I'll draw it. Supper'll be hard bread and coffee, unless you make something better." "I will." She did, by the time the kettle hissed and the pan spat fat. He had shaved at the basin, and she had rolled up her sleeves. The stew wasn't rich, but it was warm, and it quieted the wind outside. They ate in silence, only the sound of spoons and wind knocking at the door. That night, Tom slept behind the curtain in the back room. Esther lay in the front, her boots beside her cot, the trunk beneath. She did not cry. She didn't pray either. Her hands lay folded on her chest like she was already halfway into the earth, though her eyes stayed open, watching the ceiling long past midnight. In the days that followed, they did not touch. They shared chores and space like 2 ghosts unearthed into the same cabin. Esther patched holes in the coop, trapped a rat in the pantry, and beat the rugs with a vengeance born not of anger but necessity. Tom mended fence, shoed the mules, and rode out to find a lost cow. They spoke when needed. On the 3rd day, a storm blew in hard and fast. Wind screamed through the cracks in the walls, and snow came sideways, sharp as ground glass. Esther bolted the door while Tom stoked the fire. They sat on either side of it, boots off, legs stretched. Her knitting lay in her lap, half finished. Tom rubbed the back of his neck. "You ever been married before?" "No." He nodded. "Me neither." She looked at him then, really looked, and saw a man with sun-split skin, eyes that had watched too many things leave, and hands that shook just barely when still. He wasn't cruel, just spent. "Why did you agree?" she asked. Tom didn't answer at first. The wind howled. Then, softly, "Because you were left standing. And I've seen that look before, in horses, in men. Ain't right to let something get left just because it wasn't wanted by the first hand." Esther said nothing, but her fingers stilled on the yarn. Something shifted then, not warmth, not fondness, but a recognition. 2 people who had been let down by the world, now forced to build something from the scraps. A week passed, then 2. The storm broke and the land softened with mud and melt. The hen laid 3 eggs. Esther salted pork, aired the quilts, and drew a map of the house in her mind, knowing every creak and splinter. Tom stopped smoking inside. He left his boots by the door, and then one morning she opened the barn door and found him on his knees beside a calf, blood slicked to his wrists, the mother cow dead beside him. "Help," he said, not looking up. She did. She gripped the calf's slick hooves while he pulled. She steadied the lantern when he cursed. She tied off the cord when it finally came free, limp and wet but breathing. Together they wiped it down, wrapped it in burlap, and laid it in straw. Afterward they sat in the hay, sweat drying on their skin despite the cold. Tom leaned back against the stall wall. Esther sat beside him, knees drawn up, the lantern between them. "You did well," he said. "I know." He grinned at that, just a flicker, the ghost of it, but it stayed longer than any smile she'd seen on him. That night she slept without her boots on the floor. Come spring, the land would test them. Water would grow scarce. Someone would come knocking with bad intentions. Past lives would stir like ghosts under thawed ground. But for now, the cabin held against the wind. And in it were two people neither young nor broken, who had been discarded but refused to be done. By April, the earth had begun to crack open like a wound, and things long frozen started to breathe again. The pasture behind the barn grew a brittle kind of green, not lush, but enough to fool the cattle into thinking there was promise in it. Snowmelt turned the stream behind the house to a sluggish vein of brown water, and Esther caught her reflection in it once, older than she remembered, but alive in a way she hadn't been in years. Tom built her a shelf beside the stove. No ceremony, no word of it. Just one morning it was there, rough-hewn pine, nailed crooked into the wall with two hooks beneath for her apron. She ran her fingers along it once, then filled it with the jars she'd cleaned and stacked in the cellar, where once only mouse droppings and old wire had lived. She started to hum again, quiet and low only when she was alone, not songs with words, just the memory of them, soundless in her throat like something sacred she wasn't ready to share. Then the letter came. It arrived in a stranger's hand. A boy from town, no more than 14, rode out on a gray pony and brought it to the edge of the fence line where Tom was mending a post. Said his pa ran the mercantile. Said a man came looking for a woman. Said he left this. Tom didn't open it, just turned it in his hand, heavy with unspoken things. The name on the front was written in a hand Esther knew well, bold, masculine, slanted like a blade. Mrs. Esther Bell Hayward. Tom handed it to her at supper. She took it without comment, slid it into her apron pocket, and didn't read it until the house was dark. She stood outside under the moon to do it, boots sinking slightly in thawed mud. Her hands did not shake. The letter was short. "I have reconsidered. I was unwell that day at the station. A man makes mistakes. If you come to me now, I will still take you. The land is thriving. There is room." It was signed C.L. Hayward. Esther folded it once, then again, until it was no bigger than a postage stamp. She didn't burn it. She buried it beneath the post where the fence had rotted. She came in quietly, washed her hands, and scrubbed the sink until the enamel turned red with the cold. The next morning, Tom looked at her over coffee. "He wants you back." "Yes." "You going?" "No." He nodded once, that was all. After that, something loosened between them, not affection, nothing soft, but an easing of edge, a turning toward instead of away. They worked side by side more often. She taught him how to mix vinegar with lye to clean rust from the hinges. He showed her how to set traps for the foxes that had started slipping in at night to nose the coop. One evening, just before sundown, Tom came in with blood on his shirt and a limp in his gait. A barbed wire had sliced his thigh open. He hadn't noticed until the wet came through. Esther didn't speak. She brought a basin, boiled water, cleaned the wound. She stitched him with a needle meant for sacks and thread she'd saved from Kansas. She stitched straight and tight the way her mother had taught her. Tom sat through it without flinching. Only once did he grip the edge of the chair. When she was done, he looked at her and said, "You could have been a doctor." She wiped her hands. "I was a maid, in a house with no books and too many boys. This is what I know." That night she slept on the cot again, but the curtain between the rooms stayed open. The next weeks passed without much shift, but something had changed beneath the surface, like the difference between snow that's fresh and snow that's packed down, weighted with time. Esther began keeping a ledger of the hens laying. She made soap from the tallow Tom brought in. She laughed once at a joke he made about the rooster that wouldn't crow unless she cursed it first. He smiled for a while after that. Then came the rider. He showed up with dust on his coat and a rifle on his back. Esther saw him first, through the kitchen window. He came slow, like a man who knew not to spook cattle but wasn't sure whether what waited ahead was man or ghost. Tom met him on the porch, one hand near the axe that leaned against the post. "Can I help you?" he asked. "I'm looking for Hayward's wife." "She's not here." The man squinted past him and caught sight of Esther in the doorway. "She's supposed to be with Charles. There's papers filed, names signed. He said she was taken, said you were the one." Tom said nothing. The rider licked his lips. "He aims to come for her, says he paid for passage, claims rights." Esther stepped forward. "Tell him I've been married since the day I stepped off that train. Tell him the price of a letter doesn't bind a woman's body." The man looked between them. He won't take kindly to being denied. Tom's voice came low. "Then he's welcome to come try, but bring a coffin." The rider left. That night Tom cleaned both rifles. Esther ground cornmeal into flour and boiled beans with lard. They didn't speak of what might come. The threat sat between them unspoken, like smoke beneath the floorboards. But when she sat down across from him at the table, she didn't feel small. And when he looked at her, it wasn't pity. It was something sharper, recognition, respect. A readiness for war. The first bullet came through the window just after dawn. It shattered the glass above the stove, struck the beam behind it, and left a splintered hole that whistled when the wind hit it just right. Esther was at the sink with her sleeves rolled, scraping lard into a pan. Tom was outside, loading the feed cart. The crack of the shot pulled him down to his knees before instinct could reason. Another followed high and wide into the barn siding. Esther didn't flinch. She ducked low, pulled the rifle from beneath the cot, and crawled to the broken window. Through it, she saw nothing but the scrub brush rippling and the dark shapes of two horses tied off near the dry creek. One rider at least, maybe two. She breathed slow, stood, moved to the front door. Tom came in crouched, blood on his cheek where a splinter had struck him, eyes sharp. "One man, possibly two," Esther said. "They're waiting." Tom spat into the stove ash. "Hayward wouldn't come himself. He sends men, paid or scared. He's always been a coward." Esther didn't answer. She went to the trunk and opened it for the first time since she arrived. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was the second rifle, not new but cared for. Beneath it, a small bundle of cloth. She unwrapped it, one wedding ring, never worn. She slid it into her coat pocket. They took positions. Tom by the west side of the barn, Esther in the root cellar trap door, which opened toward the back. They waited 2 hours in silence. The wind died. A hawk circled high above. When the man came, he didn't come with stealth. He walked open, bold, dragging a broken tree limb behind him like a staff. He was thin, long-legged, with a pistol at his hip and a long scar beneath his left eye. He looked like a man used to women shrinking when he smiled. He called out, "Esther Bell, I've got a letter here says you belong to Mr. Hayward, and you've been misled by a no-good ranch thief." Esther didn't reply. He stepped closer to the cabin. "You got till I count to 10 to come out, ma'am." After that, I'm comin' in, and I'm not askin' sweet. At 5, Tom fired from the barn. The bullet hit the dirt by the man's boot. He jumped, swung around, pulled iron. But Tom was gone, already shifting to another post. The man fired 3 times into the barn wall, then cursed. Esther rose silent from the cellar door, rifle cocked. The shot she fired took him clean in the thigh. He went down howling, his gun spinning from his hand. She approached without hurry, boots crunching the frost-hardened dirt. Tom came out beside her, rifle in hand, eyes narrowed. The man clutched his leg, bleeding freely now. "You crazy bitch. Hayward'll kill you for this." Esther looked down at him. "I crossed a continent by myself, buried 2 brothers, 1 mother, and everything I ever had in Kansas soil. You think I'm afraid of a man who hides behind paid hands?" The man spat blood. "He'll come." Tom stepped forward and knelt. "Tell him to come, but tell him this too, next man he sends, we don't shoot to wound." They loaded the bleeding man onto his horse, tied him there with his own belt, and turned the animal east. Slapped it once, watched it carry him away like a rag strung between saddle and sky. When the dust settled, Esther stood for a long time beside the broken window. Tom reloaded both rifles. Neither spoke of what might follow. But that night she moved her cot into the back room without asking. He made space without question. In the weeks that followed, they fortified the house, reinforced the door with iron plate, buried traps around the coop, posted a rifle by every window. They built a new fence and strung cowbells along it. Esther began rising at dawn, checking the eastern ridge for riders. Tom learned to listen more than speak. One morning he brought in a letter found tacked to the gate post. "You have stolen my future. You'll pay in blood. This is not over." There was no signature, just a black cross drawn where a name might have been. Esther burned it in the stove and said nothing. A few days later, the creek behind the house ran red with dye. Someone upstream had poured pigment into it, a warning. Tom cursed, rode upriver, found nothing. Whoever had done it left no tracks. Then the chickens began to disappear. One a night, always clean, no feathers, no mess, just gone. No prints, no claw marks, too precise for foxes. Tom stayed up one night with a lantern. Esther waited inside, her hand on the rifle. At midnight, a figure rose from the far field, small, fast, cloaked. Not Hayward, not a man at all. A girl, maybe 13, thin as bone, fast as a jackrabbit. Tom caught her by the collar as she reached for the coop. She didn't scream, didn't fight, just stared up at him with eyes that didn't match her age, old, burned-out things. Esther came outside, took one look, and said, "Let her go." Tom hesitated. "She's been stealing. She's been eating." They brought the girl inside, fed her. She said her name was Ruth, that she lived in the canyon with a man she wouldn't name. Said he was sick, said they had no food. Said she took what she needed, and only what wouldn't be missed. Esther looked at her long. "You're not his child." "No, but he took you." "Yes." Esther stood. "You'll stay here now." Ruth looked like she might run. Esther added, "If he comes for you, he'll regret it." And just like that, the house became 3. Tom made a space for Ruth in the loft. Esther taught her to clean fish, trap rabbit, boil lye soap. Ruth didn't speak much, but she watched. And she listened, especially when Esther spoke low at night, by firelight, telling pieces of how a woman can survive anything so long as she stays quiet long enough to see the weak spot in the man who hurt her. Hayward didn't come that spring, nor in summer, but Esther knew silence was not peace, it was planning. And when he did come, it wouldn't be with words. That summer turned dry and mean. Rain never came in full, only spit from a sky that seemed to watch the land with contempt. Cracks split the garden beds. The hens stopped laying for 2 full weeks. A cow miscarried, and Tom buried it himself in the back field, shoulders bent like a man twice his age. They boiled water in the mornings to clear the sediment, carried buckets from the stream, and learned to use every scrap twice. Ruth took to sleeping with a knife beneath her pillow. She never said why. No one asked. Esther began carrying her old wedding ring on a leather cord around her neck, not for memory, but as a promise to herself, never again. That ring, cold as bone, was the last piece of her first life she'd kept. Now it lay against her collar like a warning sign to whatever man might still think she could be owned. One morning in late August, while Tom was at the far fence and Ruth was setting snares, a wagon appeared on the rise. Esther saw it from the kitchen, her hands wrist-deep in flour. She wiped them, stepped outside, 2 men, one driving, the other beside him. The wagon was empty, too clean, wheels too polished for this dust-choked country. They wore suits like they hadn't worked a day, collars stiff, coats too fine. The one on the right stood as they rolled up, a folded paper in his hand. Mrs. Hayward. Esther didn't answer. Tom was too far to reach in time, but she didn't glance his way, just squared her shoulders and took one step forward. The man cleared his throat. "We've come to inform you that Mr. Charles Hayward has filed legal claim to reclaim marital property under territorial statute. That includes livestock, tools, and any assets accrued since March 8th of this year. Failure to comply may result in..." She slapped the paper from his hand. It fluttered into the dust. The driver reached for something under the seat. Before his fingers closed, Ruth stepped from behind the well post, her knife in hand, and said clear as glass, "Don't." The man froze. Looked at her like she was a ghost. Esther said, "Tell Hayward if he wants what he thinks is his, he needs to ride here himself." "He will," the man spat. "Then we'll be waiting." They left in a flurry of grit, the paper still lying face down in the dirt. Tom got back just after. He didn't ask what happened. He saw Ruth's grip on the knife and the look in Esther's eyes, and that told him enough. That night, Tom brought out a tin box from the barn rafters. Inside were 3 shells wrapped in oilcloth, hand-loaded, iron-capped, illegal in any proper county. "For the end," he said. Esther took one, Ruth another. The third stayed in the box. They started sleeping in shifts. Tom took the early hours, Esther the dark ones before dawn. Ruth watched the East Ridge every morning, her eyes never blinking. No more chickens disappeared. The hawk that circled the property was no longer just passing. Esther fed it scraps, called it by name, which. A week passed, then 2. Then one night fire appeared on the horizon, not a wildfire, not lightning, torches, riders. Tom rang the bell they'd strung between the house and the barn. Ruth kicked the embers from the stove, lit the lamp. Esther was already lacing her boots. They didn't speak. They moved like pieces on a board already memorized. 6 riders, no colors, no flags, no words. They came in a crescent arc, spread wide, trying to circle. Tom took the west window, Esther the front porch. Ruth, small as she was, climbed to the roof with a lantern and a bucket of ash soaked in oil. The first man reached the fence line. He fired once high, warning shot. Esther didn't return it. She waited, watched. A second rider approached, slower. He carried a white rag. She stepped out. He stopped 10 paces from the porch. "Mr. Hayward requests you surrender the property. All claims will be dropped if you leave quietly by dawn." Esther shook her head. "I'm not property. He's willing to forgive. I'm not." The man lowered the rag. The sound that followed wasn't gunfire, not at first. It was the cry of horses, the crack of hooves on dry stone. Then came the shots, sharp, stuttering, wild. The first bullet tore through the porch rail. Esther dropped to her knees, fired back. One man fell, the others scattered, horses rearing. Tom picked off the second from the barn window, neck shot, clean. Ruth lit the oil ash, shoved it down the chimney pipe. The entire east side of the roof flared orange. Smoke poured from the barn. The riders panicked, but one man stayed. He came on foot through the dust and fire, gun low, face drawn, Charles L. Hayward, thinner than the photograph he'd sent months ago, angrier. He walked straight toward the porch, not firing. "You think this is justice?" he snarled. "You think you get to choose." Esther stepped down the stairs. The ring on the cord at her neck caught the firelight. "I chose the second you left me standing." Hayward raised his pistol. So did Ruth from the roof, 2 shots. One from the porch, one from above. Hayward dropped like a cut tree, face first into the dust. Silence. The horses fled. The fire died quick, smothered by Ruth's second bucket. In the dark that followed, no one spoke. Tom dragged Hayward's body out to the edge of the field, buried him without marker. The others scattered or died riding. No lawman came asking. That winter the wind returned. The coop was rebuilt, the barn repaired. Ruth planted corn in the old potato rows. Esther built shelves in the loft. Tom carved 3 notches into the porch beam, one for each man they'd put in the ground. The marriage stayed simple. But what lived inside it was no longer survival. It was something older, harder. A kind of loyalty forged in blood and fire. They never hung curtains, they never hung photographs, but no one ever called Esther Bell property again. The years didn't soften them. They aged the way dry wood does, weathered, stripped of what's unnecessary, each line a mark of what had been endured. The ranch never grew large. The cattle never numbered more than a dozen. But the land held, and so did they. Ruth stayed. She never spoke again of the man in the canyon. Whatever bond had existed between her and the sickness she fled, it burned away with the barn fire and Hayward's death. She became a fixture, boots too big, hair always tied with twine, eyes like a trap that had never sprung. In the spring of the second year, she brought home a broken foal with a twisted leg. Tom said it wouldn't walk. Esther said it wouldn't survive the night, but Ruth stayed up with it, wrapped the leg, fed it by hand. The foal lived, grew into a mean little gelding with a bite worse than his kick. She named it Sin. Tom laughed at that, his first real laugh in months. Sounded like someone dragging nails across wood, but it warmed the walls. They didn't speak often of what happened. Hayward became a name spoken only once a year, when the fence post by his grave sagged and someone had to write it. Tom never marked the grave, but Ruth placed 3 black stones in a line there every December. No one ever moved them. Esther kept the wedding ring. She buried it in the garden beneath the old tomato rows. That was the same year the plants finally bore fruit, red and bitter, but alive. She canned them. The jars lined the same shelf Tom had built her that first week. More riders came through as years passed. Drifters, prospectors, claim jumpers. One man came looking for Ruth by another name, one she didn't answer to. Tom turned him away with a rifle. He never came back. Sometimes Esther would sit on the porch and stare east, toward the depot at Las Salinas. The place where her name had first been spoken by a stranger, then thrown into the dirt like something bought and dropped. She never returned there, but every March 8th she rose before dawn, walked to the field and burned something small, paper, cloth, once a yellowed photograph folded to the size of a matchbox. Ruth always watched her from the coop, silent. Years passed like wind, without ceremony, without warning. Tom grew slower. His right hand curled at the knuckles one winter, and he couldn't grip the axe the same after. Esther cut the firewood instead. Ruth shoed the mules. Nothing was said. The balance shifted, and no one marked the weight of it. One morning in his 68th year, Tom went out to check the far fence and didn't come back. Esther found him slumped beside the post, hat still on, one hand resting on the wire like he meant to finish the job. His face held no fear, only the quiet. They buried him under the cottonwood tree behind the barn. No preacher. Just Ruth, Esther, and the sky. Esther placed the axe by his grave, not a cross, not a name, just the thing he'd carried longest. She didn't weep, not then, not later. But her boots stayed by the door for 3 days untouched, and no coffee boiled in the kitchen. Ruth took over the ledger, managed the cows, set traps. She didn't ask what came next. Neither did Esther. Time passed. One summer a letter came. Addressed to Mrs. Esther Bell, not Hayward. The name was written in a woman's hand. Inside was a short note. I was on that train too. I saw what he did. I never forgot. There was no signature, only a pressed flower between the folds, dry yellow, from a desert field. Esther burned the note but kept the flower. Pinned it above the stove with a rusted nail. Years later, when Ruth turned 21, Esther gave her the house deed, said nothing. Ruth signed it without blinking. The same week, Esther packed a small satchel filled with dried meat, one wool blanket, and a locket Ruth had once mistaken for empty. Inside was a drawing, just lines and ink, but it was the cabin, the coop, the tree, and 3 figures too small to see clear. One was holding a rifle, one held a pail, one stood between them, hands empty. Esther left before sunrise, walking west instead of east, not toward town, not toward memory, just toward the ridgeline where the hills turned gray and the sky never promised rain. She didn't leave a note. Ruth didn't need one. She didn't take the rifle, didn't take the ledger, just her boots, her name, and the years no one else had been allowed to steal. In the months after, no one asked Ruth where she'd gone. No one rode out to the ranch looking for old debts. They wouldn't have found her anyway. Some say she died out there. Some say she reached the river country, changed her name, and lived quiet among the mesquite and women who'd also seen things they didn't speak of. Others believe she became a ghost, riding the high trails, watching for girls with calloused hands and something hungry in their eyes. But Ruth knew the truth. The woman who'd been rejected at the station hadn't vanished. She'd become something harder than revenge. She'd become free.